Oh, oh yes. Oh, they've got it wrong here. And title wrong. Oh, they've got you right. I'm elevated to Emma. No.
Good morning, members and members of the public. I'd like to begin by welcoming everyone to this meeting of the Environment and Green Investment Committee at New Shire Hall at Alconbury Weald. The council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. May I ask, though, that everyone present turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate while the meeting is taking place. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest marked fire exit and assemble in the car park. The closest fire escape is through the middle doors on my left. So we start with item 1, which is apologies for absence and declarations of interest. Would the Democratic Services Officer please report any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Jonas King, Councillor MacDonald and Councillor Milnes, and there are no substitutes today.
Thank you very much indeed. Item 2, oh, sorry, does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? I'm not seeing anyone. Item 2, minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of September 2023. We're being asked to approve the minutes of the committee meeting held on the 7th September 2023 as an accurate record, including both a public and a confidential set of minutes. If any committee member wishes to raise a question on the accuracy of the minutes only, can they do so now? Although if there are any issues with the confidential minutes, I would suggest that we deal with those at the end of the meeting. Are members content with the accuracy of both the public and the confidential minutes?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. That is unanimous. So the updated action log was also included in the published papers for this meeting. Officers, are there any updates on the action log? Frank?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Action 162. An email went to members of the committee yesterday just to provide the clarity around who's responsible ultimately for electric vehicle charging strategy. It's this committee. So I did provide that in writing to the members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think that is rather stretching the word clarity, as it appears that this committee is responsible for the EV charging strategy. Highways and transport is responsible for where things go on the highway, and the combined authority is also responsible for EV strategy. So once again, it's this puff pastry layers of local government that we have in Cambridgeshire, which bless us every single day. It makes perfect sense, the Vice Chair says. Yes, of course. Any other issues with the action log, or are we happy to agree that? Let's move on then. Thank you. We've received no petitions or public questions. So we go on then to item 4, which is the Innovate UK Net Zero Living Programme Phase 2 bid. So I'm going to ask the Assistant Director of Climate Change and Energy Services, Cheryl French, to present and indeed update on this report.
Thank you. So Innovate UK runs a 3-year programme, which is called a Net Zero Living Programme. And this programme is really about trying to accelerate the transition to net zero, and particularly across the energy system. So just to give some context to that, in Cambridgeshire, 45% of our emissions are related to the energy system. So it's a significant area of work. What this Innovate UK programme is trying to do is trying to target non-technical barriers to delivery. So there's an acceptance that the technical opportunities are available. So air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, energy efficiency schemes, but that actually it's the non-technical issues like financing, organizational capacity, procurement mechanisms, which are needed to update and reflect and change. And I think one of the key things that we need to look at is that when we are getting to net zero, in whatever year we get there, that means everything across the whole of our system needs to change. And that is a significant impact on everything we do in terms of the financing, the procurement, how we govern it, the products and services that we buy and support. and how our businesses drive some of that. So we submitted 3 bids. We led a bid which was for £4.9 million, and this was a partnership of 16, which was all the local authorities with the CPCA, except Fenland, and it also included partners which were business partners, the Greater South East Net Zero Hub. Now, we heard disappointing news yesterday, which was to say that we're not selected as a demonstrator bid, but it still means we've got 2 bids in the running. So we submitted 2 further bids, which were a much smaller scale. So one was a Pathfinder Places bid, which is for £150,000. And that's really around looking at how to set up a relationship between the local area and government on what we can collectively do to deliver against the 2050 government target of net zero target. So it's how do we develop a locally determined contribution with the collection of climate action plans and other plans that we have in place across our area, and what does that look like? And so this piece of work, if we're fortunate to be funded by it, and we'll know on, I think it's the 8th or 9th of November, really sets the evidence base for that discussion. And so that would be run by Hughes Hall with other partners. The third bid is working with Peterborough City Council, and I'm really pleased to announce that they are going forward to interview on their demonstrator bid. So we have got a work stream which sits within their bid for £330,000, and that's really looking at how you finance a collection of net zero projects in an area. So if you've got a street or you've got a neighborhood, how do you put together the retrofit, the energy, the net zero electric vehicle charging? How do you put those together and finance those? And that's a piece of work that we at Cambridgeshire County Council will lead if they get their demonstrator project. So we've still got 2 to go. But what I wanted to just really highlight from this process was that we undertook some research in phase 1. And I think for the whole partnership, it has given us a lot of learning around some of the changes that we need to have. And I think the reflections that I've got are, as a partnership, we were working really well together and trying to identify what the problems were. And we've still got that. We've got that information, we've got that evidence, and now it's working out how we get that delivered. And I think that the second bit was that in terms of the learning, we also now know some of the skill sets that are required, not just in the financial sector, but also in the local authority sector, that we need to develop to be able to be ready and have the capacity and capabilities to make the changes in this delivery. So I won't go through the rest of the reports, but basically what we've got here is that we wanted you to note the findings from our phase 1 research, which was really useful, the work that we did on phase 2, and that if we're fortunate to progress with those other 2 bids, that we are looking for a delegation to Frank as the exec director to be able to sign grant agreements, and also for us to be able to deliver our obligations into those bids. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Cheryl. Any questions from members about anything in that report or Cheryl's update, please? Councillor Hathorn.
Well, it's quite tangential, but these financial cases for whole streets or neighbourhoods, there seems to be a parallel issue with connecting to Anglian Water for certain streets, and it would be interesting to know if those models could be used for other sort of key infrastructure issues as well.
Actually, we're learning from a water challenge, which is why there is this move to want to do street-based retrofits as an example. So the main model that was being used was in Hull, where there was significant flood risk challenges, and they were needing to put in flood risk measures in a street. And what they were basically saying is, while they were doing that, we might as well do all the other bits that we can at the same time. And so there was a strong dialogue with the community around all the co-benefits you can do by putting these other things together at the same time. And so I think that's where the learning's coming from, to be able to inform the energy piece as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I think a reasonably simple question, Cheryl. How do you think this will benefit rural areas, particularly those remote rural villages that we've got in Cambridgeshire? How will they then be able to get retrofitting to try and, improve the situation for them?
So as we know, actually, it's much harder to retrofit in our rural areas, either because you've got off-gas communities, so you don't have some facilitating infrastructure, but you just don't have the densities. And so it's a very different commercial model. And I think that was one of the ambitions of trying to work through on Swaff and Prior, was to say, we need to find solutions for these other communities that aren't in those dense urban environments. So certainly with the original demonstrator bid, the idea was to work at a village scale and say, well, what is the gap? Where is the gap between what is a viable scheme and what's a non-viable scheme? And how do you look at putting a whole range of projects together? Some, if you were doing, for example, solar, have got high returns, and there are some which have absolutely very low returns. And so the idea was to try and create a net zero asset class, which basically said, right, we'll look to get an average return of, let's say, 4% across all these projects in an area, which could be a village, so that you get the range of projects you need, not just taking out the high performing measures, which once you take that out, you don't get the return on some of the others yet. And that's partly because of the market, but also partly because we haven't yet worked through all the risks and the challenges on projects, and investors aren't confident on the returns. So the idea is to try and keep working in the rural areas, to keep building up the evidence base on what sort of returns you get if you put measures into homes, and building that confidence of the investors to say, right, this is the type of business model we now need in these areas. And it is different.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I was only thinking because, like, in my particular division at the moment, we've got GigaClear digging up the streets, putting in, cabling for that thing. So it would have been useful if, when they were doing that, if we could have had, do precisely what you said. If we're going to dig up the streets once, we might as well dig it up once rather than umpteen times to get all the different infrastructure in. So, if we could work with firms like that to do that sort of thing, I think that would benefit. Do you get the end of that?
Yes, I did.
We did, yes.
I agree. I mean, sometimes the same thing as you now. So it's hard sometimes coordinating across a lot of different businesses and infrastructures, but we've got to make an effort to try and get there, to get the right business models.
The holy grail of a holistic approach to street works and utilities. Yeah, it's defeated us all for decades, I think. Councillor Bradnam and then Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you. One of the things one becomes aware of when, as Councillor Gardner said, when people are digging up the street, they're usually putting in something in ducting. And I do wonder whether we ought to, sorry, I'll just throw this out there. Others will understand this is much more complex than I'm suggesting it is, but that we insist on a size of ducting that can take the things that we might need to retrofit. So not just their own bit of ducting, but something that's big enough to take electricity, fibre, even if they're not the fibre provider, so that we reduce the number of times that roads are dug up. I know this is not easy because I've looked under the tarmac of quite a lot of roads, and it's deeply complicated, but I just wondered whether we could have some kind of understanding about what's put, when people are digging up roads, what is put down there.
I think there's one thing which is about the infrastructure, but actually the other really big challenge that we've got is demand. And so this is, the demand is not coming through for the low carbon technologies yet. And part of that is because the market isn't in the place that we need it to be, supply chain, but also how the costs are distributed is also a challenge in terms of, gas prices, electricity prices, and what's the incentive yet for householders? So there's got to be a lot more work around increasing demand in our business models as well, to be able to then move forward, plus the infrastructure problem.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. It's a similar point, really. I also represent a lot of rural villages, Worsley, Abbottsley, Gransden, which are almost completely, they're off the gas grid, and so almost everybody has an oil burner. Given that the government seems to be retreating from its net zero ambitions now, and that there's not going to be any legal imperative to replace these things, wouldn't you agree that it's going to significantly reduce demand? Nobody wants to invest in technology unless they have to, apart from some people who understand the challenge. But it's going to be, I think, that's going to be a challenge for us. We've got our 2045 ambitions, which seemed great when we set them, but are now looking very difficult to achieve, given the government's attitude to net zero. So do you think that if there's no legislative reason for people to switch from gas to an oil from other technologies, do you think that the demand is still going to be there?
So I can only use the example of, and it might be a bit sensitive, but Solar Together. So we had increased demand for solar panels and batteries. So there is latent demand. I think one of the challenges is some of the complexities of delivery that need to be worked through. So whether there is a 2045 target, whether there's a legislative background, I think there are people who want to make change and want to either manage their bills in some way, or they want to make changes because of environmental issues. So we're not yet dealing with demand in some areas, but I think, just for example, on air source heat pumps, there is now a bigger level of grants coming forward to support individual homes if they want to switch to an air source heat pump. That quite recently changed from £5,000 to £7,500. So I think there are still the incentives for people to access if they can. I think there is some latent demand. Whether it's enough to get us to 2045 or 2050, that I can't provide you evidence for, but I think at the moment there's enough to be able to start moving forward.
Thank you, Cheryl, and I do agree, Councillor Ferguson, that this is a very significant risk in my view. It takes away a really enormous piece of that jigsaw and the tools that we have at our disposal collectively and nationally to address the issue. I'd like to come back.
Yeah, it also reduces the commercial. I'm an engineer, yeah, and engineering and industry works on basically are forced quite often by legislation to innovate, and that's one of the innovative pressures. And without that pressure, the amount of innovation. I was with Urban and Civic, the developer who's developing Alconbury Weald and Wintering in St Neots, and they were saying that they feel that they're not going to be able to force their industry to change it to doing simple things like fitting solar panels and fitting heat pumps. And so without that innovation piece and without that legislative piece, I can't imagine it's going to happen.
Indeed, and investment in innovation and in construction and production also relies on certainty from government of a long-term view of these things, and if that's not there, it's going to be very, very difficult to persuade anybody to invest in the ways forward. Any other questions for Cheryl? Any comments by way of debate on this paper? Not seeing any. So members, just a reminder, we're being asked to note the findings of the phase 1 Can Fund feasibility study and the scope of a phase 2 Innovate UK Net Zero Living Programme Can Fund demonstrator funding bid of 4.9 million, which we've heard an update on, as set out in section 2 of the report. We're asked to note the additional Cambridgeshire bid applications for £150,000 Pathfinder project, building on one aspect of the phase 1 study, and the inclusion in Peterborough City Council's Innovate UK demonstrator bid proposal for £330,000. And we're asked to delegate authority to the Executive Director of Place and Sustainability to enter into grant agreements and agreements with partners if the bids are successful for any of those bids, and to delegate authority again to the Executive Director to undertake any associated procurement, awarding and executing of contracts. Can I see those in favour of those proposals, please? I think that is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, members, and thank you, Cheryl. Item 5 then is the progress report on the Council's climate change and environment strategy target. You'll remember that some months ago we agreed to do this differently. So I've been looking forward keenly to this paper, and we have it now in front of us. So Cheryl, are you introducing, or is it over to Emily? Thank you very much. Emily, take it away.
Thank you very much. So this paper is really to provide an update on progress on delivering our climate change and environment strategies and action plan using the new methodology that was agreed earlier in the year. So back in committee in 2023, we came to yourselves to provide an update that was based off the more traditional on track, off track sort of red, amber, green RAG status, which provided a helpful snapshot of where we were in terms of delivery. But what it didn't allow us to do was to easily see how that RAG status then married up to our progress in actually delivering our overall targets and ambitions. So at that committee, we proposed this alternative methodology using risk. And so what we do with this new methodology is to treat the action plan as if it's a risk register, with each of those actions acting as a mitigation for us not meeting each of our 7 targets. The methodology for this is in briefly in the paper, but also in more detail within the appendix. And you'll see that in particular, the severity rating isn't based on one single factor. It's based on 5 different elements that try to encompass different challenges and different issues that are important to us as an authority, including things like reputation, because there are some actions that actually may be reputationally more important to deliver. You know, if ourselves or our communities think these are things we should be doing, then perhaps not delivering those is more severe. Also picking up aspects such as path dependency, if you know, we need to get one action done before we can do several others, and other elements such as carbon reduction, how much it supports biodiversity, but also how well it delivers wider co-benefits that are aligned to our wider corporate objectives. So it tries to take a very holistic view of how climate and environmental action and our target delivery can support the organisation as a whole beyond our pure net zero objectives. So the risk starting point is at 25, so that highest risk rating. That's because we started from the position of as if pre having the action plan, we've done very little to date. So that's our position. Now coming to you at committee today, I've processed through the methodology to show where we are today, having had a year, 18 months of delivery of our new action plan. And the risk has improved overall. We've moved down slightly from that 25 down to 20. And you'll see in the paper that diagram showing that movement, and you'll see that some of the targets are hovering around a 16 as their residual risk and others around the 20. So what this is reflecting is that we have made significant progress, but there's still a long way to go. As you can imagine, with that 2045 target in particular, you wouldn't necessarily expect to see massive change in 12, 18 month timeframes. So the paper goes into detail of the progress and key challenges associated with each of those individual targets. So you can interrogate that a little bit more. And going forward, we are aware that there's an awful lot of different separate reporting on our climate and environment work that goes on, particularly coming to this committee. So one thing we're looking at doing is how we can consolidate some of those different reports, such as this one and our carbon footprint report, into a single paper that will come to yourselves, so you get the full picture in one fell swoop rather than disaggregating different elements. We're not quite sure what that will look like just yet, but that's something we'll be looking at for this time next year when you get your next update. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Emily. I have to say personally, the report is all that I hoped it would be in terms of the way it presents the information, and I'm very pleased indeed to see it. So thank you very much. Any questions for Emily, anyone on this report, or indeed for Cheryl? No questions? No, Councillor Gardner?
We might as well have one question. With regard to the report, if we have a situation like we had with Solar Together, how are we incorporating that risk into this? Because the Solar Together situation, I think, has created quite a lot of reputational damage. So how are we taking that on board, and how then can we look to improve the county council's reputation going forward? Because if we want people to switch to solar power or whatever, we need to be, you know, leading from the front. And if people think they can't trust the county council, then that, I think, will then lead to people not taking up the scheme. I must say, though, as somebody that's used Solar Together, the new operator that we have appears to be a great deal better than the previous one. So I do think we need to have a lot in the early stages, a much better vetting situation with regard to that. But I think we need to incorporate that sort of thing into this.
So I can start and then possibly hand over to Cheryl. So it's not sort of a black and white description of that being explicitly factored in. That is in part because the action plan isn't related to, say, Solar Together specifically. It's covering a wider set of work that we would look to progress on facilitating access. So, for example, we've previously looked at feasibility of doing something similar with heat pumps. Unfortunately, we found that wasn't possible, but it's looking broader than that single scheme. But what we do try to do is to weigh up those different elements when we apply that risk factor. So you've got obviously the increased risk of if we don't do the scheme because we had challenges in the past, that ups that risk, but then simultaneously, as you are highlighting, if the scheme hasn't gone well, it ups a different level. So when we look at the severity rating, what you apply is whichever is the highest risk gets applied to the rating. So it's always hopefully representing the worst case scenario rather than us accidentally under-egging things and perhaps inadvertently veering down into the realms of greenwash.
So there's one thing about how you manage it through the risk process, but separately, it's how do you manage the problem anyway, because we've had a problem and we've had reputational damage. So one of the things is we are a partner or a member of ADEPT, which is the Association for Directors of Environment and Transport. I currently chair the Energy and Clean Growth Group. And this is local authorities from across the country. And we've had conversations around who's participating in Solar Together, what are their experiences. And we have two ends. We have those where it goes smoothly and nobody's had a problem and it's all tickety-boo and everybody's happy. And then we've had the ones like us where obviously we've had a problem with an installer And so what we've set up is there's a workshop with local authorities to go through all the contracting arrangements. And then we're going to be meeting with iChooser in November to then say, this as a collective is our view on if you want to progress this type of scheme, what we would be expecting to see in terms of some of the contracting and due diligence arrangements. So that's what we're trying to set up to be able to improve the collective position for everybody. So I'm hopefully that gives you some confidence that we're trying to work this through on a bigger scale than just us, because someone else it could happen to.
Yes, please do, Frank.
So it's just to add for the committee's oversight of the delivery side of this. So we've got individual projects, as you'll see in the forward plan, and also looking at reports you've already considered. Individual projects will come to the committee if they're at the level that committee needs to have oversight around, and within that we have programme delivery assurance, risk assessment, and also when things haven't gone as well as we'd first planned, we'll bring the lessons learned back to the committee and apply that to future programmes, which is the case around Solar Together. So I think it's just general oversight of the committee to make sure we have assurance around the project delivery side of this as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that was a very useful question, surfaced some issues. It's very important that the public have confidence in people who are going to come and do works in their homes, and one of the ways in which we as the public sector wherever can help with that along with other things is to give people confidence that the people they're bringing into their homes are reputable and vetted and so on. And that's really important to do. However, it does have that risk when you lend your organizational reputation to somebody, and clearly with Solar Together, the vetting, the due diligence wasn't ours to do, and that's something that is an issue and needs to be resolved, not only for the future of Solar Together, if there is a future for Solar Together, and we've not yet made any firm decisions about that, but for all sorts of other projects in which we go out to the public, to communities, and we're really wanting to see community energy thrive and grow. If we're going out to them, not only for Solar Together, but in all sorts of other ways, and saying, look, this is what you can do, and here is a list of trusted suppliers and so on, we've got to get those reputational issues and lending of your reputational risk issues resolved. I absolutely agree. And it's important to do, because if we don't do that, people aren't going to have the confidence, and unless they know that there's someone they can trust, they're not going to have time, many people, to do their own due diligence and spend all of that time. They need to be able to have a portal that they can go through and find that they're in the world they want to be in of clean green energy. Absolutely. So Councillor Bradnam.
And that is the same, similar to what I was going to say, that we really need a clear communication strategy, because not many people have contacted me about Solar Together, but the ones who have were the ones who had a problem with installers, where they'd waited for somebody to come and do an assessment, then that one had fallen through, and then a new person had come along and hadn't taken the assessment that was done before, but had wanted to do another one. And this was somebody who was waiting to get a new boiler, or a heat pump. So I think there's a piece of work to do in the public domain here about sorry, and also I add myself into this, because I've got solar panels, but I'd quite like to get a battery, and I don't know who to go to. And I'm constantly being rung up by people saying, would you like more insulation on your roof? Would you like this? And I'm thinking, no, go away. If I want it, I'll find it myself. But actually, it would be very nice to feel that we could recommend to our residents, and indeed to ourselves, a trusted route. And certainly if we can have that trusted suppliers and an explanation of what happened and how that's being addressed, I think, I don't know if we do a series of adverts in things like the Cambridge News or anything like that, or if there's something that we can put on the website that says, yes, this is your trusted way through, that would be good.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bradnam. Something we were also trying to do, of course, with the Friday Bridge scheme, where we were trying to bring together into a single place all of those people that people need to deal with in order to do that. So yes, absolutely. Cheryl.
So yesterday there was an event which Emily was partly running, which was on action on energy. And actually one of the things that came out in the workshop that I was in, and I was sitting with Greater Southeast Net Zero Hub, was just actually the supply chain challenge in terms of retrofit, whether it's for solar, whether it's for air source heat pumps, whether it's for batteries. There just isn't enough suppliers, so competition isn't there to the level that we want. But it's also, I think the stat was about 90% were SMEs. And so when you do a big scheme like this, and I think one of the really big learning points is that the customer service journey has to be really, really privileged and made clear to everybody. So when there is a problem that it comes through, often with these small SMEs, they don't have that strong customer process to manage large volumes of complaints. So I think that's a key area for all of us working in this sector or in this area are trying to work through in terms of retrofit skills.
Indeed. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Coots.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to add my thanks for the production of this new methodology and just to recap on what we were told at the beginning would be the situation. There's going to be a need for comms and education here in the interpretation of this, in that we've changed to a very different and more accurate picture of what's happening. But it presents a much less positive picture than the previous, here's this project, here's the timeline, we're doing fine. And that can lead to some misunderstanding. If this were a normal risk register and you'd see that all of your activities and targets are right up in the top right-hand corner, you'd be saying you're doing something wrong here. But what this represents is that we're facing a climate emergency, which is an external risk, and we are attempting to mitigate it. And so we're assessing against that. So where a normal risk register like this would indicate a kind of management failure, I think, certainly a failure to properly manage risk. Here we're looking at an external risk which we're trying to manage and have a correct picture of where we're going. So it is accurate, but it needs a different mindset in how to approach it.
It does, and we did discuss that a little when we agreed to go down this route some months ago. We decided to just put on our big boy and girl pants and be brave and do it. And I think it's really, really good that we have, because it presents very clearly the challenge ahead for us, and that's no holds barred. But I'm hoping also, because we're seeing within the report movement across time of where we are with those targets, and I'm hoping that, you know, everything else, including government permitting, we will see over time the targets, the risks moving out of that red corner up there and further down as we get more positive about our ability to deal with this, and as we achieve more towards our targets. So yeah, really, really excited about this. I think it's a very clear format and absolutely the right decision that we took. So thank you to officers for running with that. Any other questions, comments? Are we happy to agree then that we have reviewed the progress, key challenges and residual risk in the delivery of the Council's climate change and environment strategy? Can I see all those in favour of that, please? Thank you very much. I think that's unanimous. Excellent. Item number 6 then is the finance monitoring report for August 2023. And we should have, I'm hoping, Sarah Haywood to present this report, and Cheryl French will also be chipping in, particularly with regard to recommendation B. And we have Sarah as if by magic. Hello, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. This is the finance monitoring report as at the end of August. On the revenue side, we're forecasting a 2.6 million overspend, mainly due to the 3.8 million pressure across the energy projects, due to the delays in energisation, means delays in income. And so although the income will come, it's having to be reprofiled to start later than previously anticipated. Appendix 2 of the Finance Monitoring Report details the progress against the St Ives Smart Energy Grid, Babraham Park and Ride, North Angle Solar Farm and Swaffham Prior Community Heat Network, so you can get an overview of the individual schemes. So that's the revenue side. On the capital side, there is 20 million of forecast slippage across the whole programme, but 12 million of this relates to the Water Beach waste treatment facilities, which there is a going through the governance process is a request to reprofile it to the next, reprofile it to future years. The Swaffham Prior Community Heat Scheme is forecasting an in-year capital pressure of 1.1 million and a total pressure of 3.2 million. And so therefore this committee is being asked to recommend to Strategy and Resources Committee to approve additional 3.2 million capital funding from prudential borrowing relating to the cost of connecting homes to the heat network. And paragraphs 2.6 to 2.12 in my covering report explain the background for this request. So that's all I was going to say, unless there's any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Cheryl, did you want to say anything in particular about Swaffham Prior before I open to questions to both Sarah and Giselle?
Yes, so obviously we've put in a request for an additional Public Works Loan Board borrowing for connecting homes to the heat network. The first thing I wanted to highlight is that obviously this borrowing is paid back over the term, and that's paid back through the income on the scheme, both through the renewable heat incentive and through the heating bills. So you'll see in, I've just got to remember which paragraph it is quickly, in paragraph, sorry, just got to get that number, in paragraph 2.8, that the business case overall is still cash positive. Okay, it's a small amount, but there is still cash positive even with the additional borrowing. So, but why do we need this? So when we originally did the business case, we had put in a sum of money for the home connections, and this was pre-COVID. That simply, those figures were just simply not something that we can work with. They were too low, they were wrong. And so when we've been now working on the home connections, we now understand better what the costs are associated with doing this. One of the challenges is that material costs have gone up significantly. So anybody who works in the industry understands the construction costs have changed, and there's inflation. But not only that, there is also some complexity in terms of how you manage digging trenches, working with householders, getting the heat interface units into the home in the right place, making sure they work effectively. And so there's quite a lot of liaison between a lot of subcontractors that we need to work with, plus agreements on going over people's land to be able to get access into homes. With the village, nothing is uniform. And so you end up having quite a lot of these discussions and negotiations. So where we're at the moment is we've got 60 homes connected. That's going to be tested and trialled over the winter period with our heat pumps. And then the second phase of connections, because we have got demand in the village to connect, will start happening again next year from March onwards. We see this as a process happening over 4 or 5 years. Some of the community connect quickly, some of them will take longer, depending on when their oil boiler comes or breaks down or they need to connect. So, but I think the key message here is no home can't connect because of price. What we agreed was that we would fund upfront the price of connections and that we would pay that back over time through the business case, so that it wasn't on the basis of if you've got money you can join, if you haven't got enough spare cash you can't join. We wanted that equitable position. And so one, pressure on costs, they've gone up, and two, it's about an upfront cost to be able to get everybody on stream and then paying back through the business case over time. I think that's it.
Thank you very much indeed, Cheryl. Any questions for either Sarah or Cheryl? And if it's for one rather than the other, could you please specify who you're asking? I'll see Councillor Gardner first and then Councillor Gay.
Thank you very much. This question is for Cheryl. With regards, so if we're starting connections again in March of next year, how many residents do you need to make it worthwhile for you to connect up, if you see what I mean? I'm not expecting you to connect one, but do you need 10? Do you need 20 or whatever? What's the sort of, or the location of where those connections are that makes it worthwhile to do that as a batch, if you see what I mean?
I mean, that's a really good point. So I think this is the feature of doing something for the first time as a retrofit. What you couldn't predict when you started was exactly which homes were signing up, at what point, and how you'd get them connected. Now we've got greater certainty around homes. We can start batching them up into streets and saving costs by doing that. So what's happened currently was you had your first 5, which we agreed as part of the contract. But then after that, it was which ones were at the right time in the right place and which customers wanted to come early. And so you ended up doing connections in different places across the village. That meant street work permits, mobilizing, demobilizing, a whole bunch of costs that you don't want to have. So we have to put efficiency into that process.
Indeed. Okay, and sorry, Councillor Gay was next and then Councillor Bradnam.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask perhaps Frank about the situation with the PWLB borrowing. Are we sure that this these 3.2 million is compliant with the current PWLB requirements? And secondly, what is the coupon for PWLB? Because the economics of this whole process has been challenged by the fact that interest rates have skyrocketed over the last years, and this really undermines the economics of the process, I think.
I can help, I think, here. So you'll see in that 2.8 that we've had to also accommodate additional costs over the lifetime of the project for borrowing, which are higher now, of course, than they were when we first were doing the business case. And so there's an additional £500,000 pressure through that borrowing into the project. It's still covered back fully, but the whole issue around borrowing for projects is obviously more challenging to make that business case work. Was that okay?
Frank, you were directly asked, did you have anything to say about the PWLB loan and compliance?
So obviously we had assurance from Corporate Finance that this is still appropriate to use Public Work Loans Board funding. I don't know the coupon price though, but I may refer to my financial colleague on screen to be able to clarify that point, please. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'll have to get back to you on that.
If you could, Sarah, that would be helpful. Certainly. Thank you very much indeed. And everyone, Councillor Bradnam, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. I guess what Cheryl French has told us is what she is, as sharply as anybody would understand, was likely to happen. That there was an initial commitment from people at Swaffham and Prior, but that was, the geographies of that maybe were not all clumped conveniently together. But I'm just wondering, you know, whenever we have new developments, and again, as others have said, this relies on government incentives and government drive, which we're not sure is going to be in that direction. But what we want to be doing is delivering this as a whole system to new developments, isn't it? And I'm just wondering, are we having conversations with developers and with planners about delivering heat networks as part of new developments? I mean, this is looking many years ahead. I mean, we've got phases, for example, at Waterbeach Newtown. We've got phases still going on at Northstowe. You know, we need to get this in as a first thing, don't we? And we need to say, yes, this is how we're going to develop in future. But there are probably undoubtedly heaps of complexities there as well. But maybe we could have some thought on that.
So there is a government regulation coming forward, which is around heat zoning, which obviously fits in with the planning system. So the aim is to identify where heat networks can go, zone those areas through the local plan process, and then the detail of how people or buildings might be mandated to connect is still going through that process of discussion. When you look at a new site, it's a whole different scenario to doing a retrofit. So when you've got a new site with a heat network, you can place the heat network through in the trenches when it's being built. The houses go on and you immediately have a connection. You don't have to talk to people to say, will you connect? That is the offer you get. So in terms of being able to plan and program and minimize cost, a new process is much easier. I think in terms of the lessons learned that we've had on this project, and this is what we're trying to share with government and others, is that while you have a process that is totally voluntary, so you have a network coming into your village and you join when you want, you can't be 100% clear of when or who is going to sign up at what point. And obviously you want to make sure that you get the value out of your existing heating system. And so you're not probably ready perhaps for 5 years, but you'll join in 5 years. That makes it a far more complex and difficult business case to manage. But saying that, what you have when you go into a community scheme is that overall the carbon emissions are better. Overall, you can plan less infrastructure on the energy network and upgrades. And overall, you can manage better the costs to consumers over the longer term. But you see that those are the issues that we need to start really working with government on.
Thank you, Chair. The other thing, which is again slightly off focus, but surely we need to be working with insulation as well. You know, we shouldn't even be thinking about retrofitting until people have got good insulation in their houses. And I just wonder if there's maybe another conversation to be had elsewhere about how we encourage people to do that.
Absolutely. The fabric first approach is what everybody wants to take. So there are challenges with historic villages in terms of how you put insulation and what type of insulation that you also work with. So we had work which was trying to get the range of energy efficiency measures coming through from government to support the residents in the village to access those at the same time as putting in something to decarbonize. So there's two mechanisms that you want to manage here. One is future fuel poverty and costs of living, which is absolutely fabric first. And then the second thing is how you decarbonize too. And so you ideally do the energy efficiency first and then do the decarbonisation. But sometimes you work in parallel to get things done.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ferguson was next and then Councillor Hathorn.
It's just an observation, really. So obviously this is a finance report, and so it talks in terms of money. But when we look at things like 2.5, talking about the underspend at Waterbeach in because we're discussing that elsewhere, but you could interpret that as being a positive thing because we don't really mention the carbon cost of inaction, and the extra cost of shipping waste across the county, incinerating things that could have been sent to landfill, reducing our recycling as well. So just looking at numbers in isolation isn't always really useful, that's all. And I just wondered in the future if we might be able to include the carbon cost of some of these factors. I know it's a lot more work, but...
It is a lot more work, but it's an important thing to do. And I would also point to the performance report which follows, which absolutely makes very, very clear what's happening regarding waste while the issues regarding Battersea and Waterbeach and so on are resolved. So yes, I agree. Councillor Hathorn.
Yes, two questions. One is, not strictly financial. So again, it's about Swaff and Prior. And I was chatting to some residents, and they had a feeling that, and it was about kind of local knowledge and local experience, what it's like to live through the project. And they were sort of saying that, you know, we told the contractors that the roads were really hard and they didn't listen, and they came in and all their diggers broke. Now, that may or may not be the case, but that was what it felt like locally. And what we get at this committee is kind of the high level technical and financial information, which is obviously really important. But I wonder if, as part of a demonstration project, there's any plan to also understand sort of what it feels like to live through these projects at local level, because I think that is an important part of persuading, of changing behaviours and getting people to sign up to these things. So is that part of some kind of process within the demonstration project, and is that going to happen, or is that happening? And the second question is more financial. North Angle Solar Farm project energisation date historically forecast at July 2023, now forecast significantly later. That looks sort of quite worrying. What's the update on that, please?
Your point about being a resident living through construction projects is absolutely valid, and it's not an experience which is universally welcomed, because there is disruption. And so we did have challenges at time on, temporary traffic lights not working, creating chaos. There was, drilling through the roads. There was vibration and there was noise. But it wasn't for a very long extended process. And so, whenever you're trying to get something to change, there is always that disruption which you go through. Now, in terms of lessons learned, we have got lots of lessons learned right from the start of how you engage a community, what they want to know and understand. And often you don't have all that information. And I think we would probably work through and do things slightly differently as we move forward. We'd be much more aware on just what is sensitive to communities, and how to manage that in a different way. Yeah, so that's that point. Then the second point about North Angle Solar Farm. So this is, yes, it's unfortunate, and our apologies to everybody that we haven't got it generating yet. We're looking at starting construction, hopefully by the end of this year, on the private wire. And the private wire is the connecting point from North Angle Solar Farm through to the grid supply point, where you can then export your electricity, and then you can get your power purchase agreements in place, and then you can start effectively bringing in the income. Now, that project isn't starting till the end of this year, and it's then going through a winter build. And so we've been trying to make sure that we don't forecast it too early, as we clearly did before, and that we manage that process so that, when it does come forward, it's coming forward when we hope it's going to be there, generating income. Okay.
Just to add that we are collectively incredibly focused on this in terms of officer time and attention and updates, and we are really very conscious that we need to move this forward as fast as possible, and we are doing everything we possibly can to make that happen.
Yes, it's fair to say that the service is feeling that pressure, and we're dedicating the resources into just trying to get that moving.
Okay.
Yes, Cheryl, just about the situation with the beginning of the work on the private wire. Is that not going to start in November now? That's been moved back again, has it? And just for information, this is unbelievably difficult, this whole situation, because there are 24 or 25 different landowners, each of which have to have a separate agreement. So, as has been said, our officers have been working incredibly hard to try and finalise these, but there's one or two people that are being difficult, I think it would be fair to say.
Thanks for recognising it is quite challenging, as you suggest. So the original time had been in July for starting construction, and that's obviously moved because of the sort of discussions were still underway on the private wire.
Thanks very much. Anybody else wanting to ask any questions or make any comments on the financial update? If not, are we happy to note the current position regarding the budget performance for the Directorate with regards to the functions that are within the scope of this committee, and to recommend to Strategy, Resources and Performance to approve an additional 3.2 million capital allocation for connecting homes to the Swaffham Prior Community Heat Network funded by Prudential Borrowing. Can I see those in favour of that, please? Once again, I think that is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, members. Item 7 then, thank you very much indeed, Sarah. That was much appreciated. Thank you for your contribution. Corporate performance report now, and I'd like to ask the Executive Director of Place and Sustainability, Frank Jordan, to present the report. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So as outlined in the paper, the strategic framework and the performance management framework of the council sets out the performance management role for the policy and service committees, and quarter reports have been presented to this committee to fulfil that role. So this report covers the period for Q1 2023 to 24, and that's up to June 23. And Appendix 1 provides the detail around the key performance indicators for this committee. I'll just highlight a number of key salient points and just hand it back to you, Chair. So the first set of indicators relate to the percentage of premises with access to superfast broadband and gigabit broadband. And you'll see that whilst we're below the national targets that we've been set for those, we're above the average mean nationally, and we're also making steady improvements to hit the target. So we're making good progress, but we're below the target at this stage. As you've outlined, the key performances around waste, around landfill performance and recycling are being impacted by the current arrangements that we're having to put in place owing to the BATC arrangements and being able to having to divert waste elsewhere. So that's probably a key issue that the committee is aware of, and we're taking through obviously significant reviews of the waste PFI arrangements to address that over the long term. And then the final one I would just highlight is that there's an update in the report around the carbon footprint, but listed in the plan for this committee, we'll have a full update on the annual carbon footprint, which will bring committee up to date, where I think there's a positive improvement around our carbon footprints, just to give you a bit of a headline around that, but we'll have a full report on that in the next committee. So I'll hand that back to you, Chair. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's slightly frustrating having to report regularly on annual things that aren't going to change for some time, but there we go. We have the suite of our performance reports here for members to ask questions or make comments about. Anybody like to say anything on any of these? Councillor Hathorn, then Councillor Ferguson.
Sorry, the Cambridgeshire recycling, reuse, composting and recovery rate. So I guess this is 150B page 98. So I guess this one's slightly unusual because it's not just the county council, it's got the district councils as well. And I guess, yeah, so well, we only can, yeah, obviously we're concerned about everyone, but our only responsibility is direct responsibility is the household recycling centre. And the other sort of question is, are we expecting this to change as well if Huntingdon have a paid for green bin situation? And does that, yeah, how does that what's the sort of effect of that? Not a very clear question, sorry.
So firstly, this is reported, and you're quite correct. It does include all the district data as well, and the commentary does explain. And I think I did a note specifically around the experience that happened in Fenland when they moved to a chargeable green waste service, and the potential implications for Hunts doing something similar. I believe there was an additional meeting to go through some of that at Huntingdonshire, and I'm sure some of the colleagues, members around the table probably know more about that than I do. But we have fed into that report, and as part of that, we explained the implications if Huntingdonshire experienced the same take-up rate as Fenland. Now, their predictions at the moment and what was fed into their report expects a higher take-up rate, and we showed the financial implications and also the fact that DEFRA need to be able to make the decision as well. So we need to put a change business case into them to consider that. We also went back recently as a request, I believe, from their Section 151 officer for what the impact would be if indeed they didn't get the take-up rate that they were expecting, and it was more in line with what had happened at Fenland, and we gave them an example of how those figures would change. Because in the note that I did previously, it explains that all of these figures are based on tonnages. So even though you may want to reduce your tonnages, and there may actually be some benefits, particularly with people home composting, etc., the way that these performance rates are looked at means that that actually goes against you. And so part of what we're looking at working collaboratively through ReCap in particular and with Hunts is to see what mitigation measures they're putting in place to try and make sure that they can retain a higher recycling rate without the impacting on these figures. We're predicting at the moment you will see something in line when they do introduce it as with Fenland, but because you're going to not really get the results of those until the following year, there's going to be a period of time. What we need to put within the case to DEFRA is to effectively go through the full waste PFI changes and try and make sure that it doesn't impact on our waste infrastructure grant payments that come through to us. But we have been very clear with Huntingdonshire that if we do end up in a situation whereby we do lose those credits, then we will be looking to them to actually repay some of that implication. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
So kind of the same point as before. If you look on 48 and 150A, you can clearly see how the continuing issues at Waterbeach are affecting our amount of waste being sent to landfill and as an influencing factor on the recycling, reuse and composting rate, and which is all fine, but until we get the full figures for the year, we can't really interpret what the carbon cost of those things are as well. So percentages are good, but being able to see in real time, how much extra carbon it's costing us would also be useful, I think.
Indeed. Any thoughts on that from officers about how we can gather and present that?
The only thing I was just going to mention is that through the Enabling Net Zero programme, which was funded by Just Transition, there's a piece of work for waste, which is looking at the low carbon opportunities potentially that could come forward. And I think Emma is all over that and looking at how that could be influencing how you move forward.
Yeah, and just to explain that the report is in a final draft stage. We're just reviewing that, and I think there's a meeting set up with Sarah Wilkinson tomorrow to make sure that the modelling and the way that we're modelling works in with how the County Council looks at our own carbon footprint as well. What Eunomia's work doesn't do is look at the price element, but one of the things that we want to talk to Sarah about is if there is a way alongside the financial modelling that we're doing on the waste work, is if there is a way that we can also start to put some carbon assessments around that as well. But it's very difficult to do until you have, like you say, some of the detail. Also, there's an opportunity with the interim arrangements for some of those waste collections to go directly to some of the facilities rather than going into Waterbeach and back out. And that's also what we're starting to have a look at.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair. A question really with regard to now that Huntingdonshire have decided to go down the line of charging for collection of green waste. How will that affect if we're getting more waste going to landfill, or we're getting more waste, garden waste being taken to our recycling centres? how will that affect Cambridgeshire's carbon reduction figures going forward? Because I would have imagined that it will see an increase. You know, we won't be reducing our carbon figures as much. So I'd just like clarification on that point, please, because I think it's very useful for us to know.
Yeah, so I think it's a very good point. And until we get first of all, we're going through an authority notification of change with Talia to make sure that we understand any implication of the Hunt's decision to be able to feed into the business case change to DEFRA. Until we've done all of that and we have the approval for that to go ahead, it's difficult to understand some of the implications to the county. And until it's actually introduced, it's very difficult to understand what's going to actually be the outcome of that decision in Hunts. And it could well be that you do end up with more home composting as an example. But as I've already explained, through the way that the figures are done on tonnages, that may not come through in quite the same way. But what we are doing, again, as part of the high level waste, and that's probably where Cheryl wants to come in, is we're looking at it through all the scope emissions. And so that will be factored in, and that's why we're working closely with Sarah Wilkinson and her team within Cheryl's area to make sure that we're aligning. So when you're getting the updates, that will include that. But you're absolutely right. There is a potential, not only from the contract waste, but also changes to the household recycling centres and the use of those where people are driving to be able to get to those may also change. But until we understand whether actually what will happen is it will go in the, what I'll call black bin, the residual waste, as opposed to in a home compost or HRC, it's very difficult to understand quite how it's going to work.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that at the moment, I think they're still going through that analysis. But I mean, you know, we know quite clearly if it's not being composted and it is going into landfill, that or you're having to travel more, then there is a challenge on the carbon. It's how do you balance that and doing something else though? And that's the bit that I think there's still a lot of work to move through.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So carrying on from that point, which you quite rightly raise, is the fact that from the 1st of April, all residents in Huntingdonshire will have to put their food waste into the grey bin because Huntingdonshire cannot charge for the collection of food waste. So that waste will be going direct, I would imagine, to landfill. So that then is, I would imagine, tell me if I'd like to know if I'm wrong in my assumption, that is then a greater cost to Cambridgeshire County Council for the disposal of that material, and therefore as a consequence there would be a greater cost to HDC because more waste is going to landfill. Am I correct in that or not? I'd just be interested to know.
Okay, I think there are a number of different assumptions that have to play through, and it could well be that some of that food waste goes into home composting again, as opposed to going into the residual bin. I suppose the main thing to say is it wouldn't come at a cost to the district council, because the district council is not the waste disposal authority, and they'd still be doing the same residual collections. But that's where the implications come through to us as the waste disposal authority. And that's where those figures and the risks and the concerns that we raised directly with colleagues in Huntingdonshire and through the RECAP partnership will come into play. And that's where we've tried to use, as I say, the modelling from Finland, doing that to try and give us a picture using the data that Hunts have worked through as part of their report, but then giving them but if you don't achieve that and you end up more with the Fenland picture, this is what it will be. And then there will need to be a pass-through cost system.
Councillor Ferguson, were you wanting to come back on the Huntingdonshire Green?
If I'm allowed
issue?
to, I just want to make some comments. There seems to be lots of speculation and extrapolation going here, yeah? And if we're going to talk about carbon cost, we need to do proper calculations, yeah? And not speculate in meetings for political gain. in terms of what Huntingdonshire's decision, it's not just a decision to start charging for green bins. Yeah, we're going to be working with our residents, yeah, to teach them how to compost. We're going to be reducing the number of diesel vehicles on the road collecting waste, number of diesel vehicles required to take waste from Alconbury to Waterbeach every day, waste that could be composted. I'd also point out that Huntingdonshire is not Fenland. It's got a much higher recycling rate than Fenland. Yeah, and we've done a good job of working with our HDC. Have done a good job of working with our residents before to change behaviour. What we really need to be doing is not reducing percentages, but reducing carbon cost. Yeah, by reducing the amount of waste we have to collect. Yeah, so the reason we're doing this at HDC is absolutely a financial imperative. Yeah, but there are bonuses, and the modelling at HDC, which we can dispute, but we need to do the calculations, shows that there will be a reduction in carbon cost. So rather than speculating, I think it would be helpful just to do the calculations.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. I had Councillor Gowing to speak next.
Looking at the graph here for 2022, it seems to dip in Fenland from April, May. Is that because it's the time you have to renew and less people have taken up the brown bin at that time? Brown bin being our garden waste. Oh, sorry.
150 bins.
98. The graph for the rolling average, where Fenland at the bottom, and there's a dip from May 22, but that is the time when people have to renew their brown bin, their garden waste, and I assume from that there's been less of a take up, and that's why.
Okay, thanks very much. So then, Councillor Hathorn, you wanted to come back in.
Yeah, so just wanted to confirm. So increased home composting is better for carbon, although the graph indicates the problem is there's this tension between the graph saying that you've reduced recycling. It's just because you're not recycling within the authority. So actually, home composting is better in terms of carbon.
Okay, I'm seeing no dissent from that. Anybody else wishing to make a contribution? Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. Given that this is retrospective over the past season, I think this dip across the board, and particularly from my own point of view, I'm represented in Greater Cambridge, but all of the lines for Cambridgeshire, Greater Cambridge Shared Waste, East Cambs and Fenland and Huntingdon all show the same dip. And I suspect that's because it was extremely hot and dry in May, which caused all our grass to dry and, die. So, if you remember, the weather was what caused this dip, I think, all over the country. Nobody had to mow any grass because it had all died. And it wasn't until July, when it started to rain, that actually probably grass cuttings and all that sort of thing picked up again. So I think this is a partly, at least, a reflection across the board of what the weather was doing to our green waste. I know that this is not just green waste, but it's the composting element of it. And I think it's just because there wasn't so much material to compost. Maybe somebody could tell me if that's sensible.
Yeah, and I think there's actually a note on the one above that refers to that last year as well. So yeah, I would agree with the assumptions you're making, Councillor.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Any other contributions? I'm not seeing anybody wanting to speak. So can I propose therefore that we note the contents of the report, which is the recommendation. See those in favour, please. Do we note what has been said? Yes, thank you very much. I think is that unanimous? Yes. Councillor Ferguson? Yes, thank you. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Item 8 then is the committee agenda plan. So if I could ask the Democratic Services Officer to update us on any changes to the agenda plan. Please, Nick, is there anything we need to know?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not aware of any changes. I don't know if other officers want to say anything. What I would just say is that it's in the action log, but just to inform the committee that since the last meeting, there were 2 appointments made, which were approved by the Executive Director under his delegation, and that included Councillor Ferguson to the Greensand Country Landscape Partnership and Councillor Bradnam to the Local Access Forum. So that's just to note them.
Thank you very much indeed. Any questions or comments on the agenda plan? No, so we can take that as read, can we? Thank you very much indeed, members. I'm having trouble with my IT this morning, but I think that we have come to the end of the meeting. Am I correct? I don't see anything else. No, so thank you all very much indeed for your attendance. Thank you, officers, for your input. Thank you, members, for your questions and comments. We have a biodiversity gathering this afternoon. I'm not sure what time. Can anybody go? 2 o'clock. So we have a very long lunch ahead of us, it looks to me. Okay, Councillor Bradnam.
Just to let you know, I won't be able to attend that because I have another meeting.
No, thank you. Right, so apologies from Councillors Bradnam and Gay for the afternoon. Councillor Coots?
I think the 2 o'clock appointment is a hybrid meeting, so you can attend online as well.
Oh, that's true. Yes, yes. You can forego lunch and drive home instead. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you all.